First of all, thank you very much for joining us today.
Delighted.
So, what's new?
Well, not much. Berkshire has a standard catechism, and it doesn't change much.
All right, well, that's good news. Kind of like when you said your flight was uneventful. We like to hear news like that.
Yes.
What's different in the last couple of months is that Warren has come out with his news about the prostate cancer. What was your reaction when he told you?
Well, I regard it as a total non-event. I would bet a lot of money that I have more than he does. I don't even allow him to check for it.
Why?
I think it's likely to cause him to do a dumb thing. So when my doctor puts down PSA test, I just cross it out.
One thing that it has brought to the attention, though, is the succession plans. How do you feel about the succession plans that Berkshire has already laid out?
Well, I've never been more comfortable about succession or duration of culture than I am right now. Our new investment people show enormous promise. And
Todd and Ted?
yes, and it was good that we were provoked into doing that by Lou's retirement. And no, I have enormous confidence in the continuation of the culture.
You are 88 years old now, and you've been watching a lot of things that have taken place. I think our viewers can learn a lot from your perspective as an investor. You're one of the greatest investors of all time. Is there anything happening in the investing or business world right now that seems like deja vu to you?
Well, it's always a little different. People are always quoting Mark Twain. Perhaps the comment was apocryphal. But history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. So sure, a lot is the same. The panic that came as a predecessor of the Great Recession had common themes that are always the same. The crazy greed, the crazy leverage, the crazy delusions. And I think we were very lucky that the outcome wasn't worse. You know, if it were a just God, we deserved worse than we got.
Did you see that coming? Simply again because you've been
Well,
watching
of course we
things for
knew
so
it was
long.
coming, and we always used to say, people would say, "What do you think about the crazy consumer credit or the crazy this, the crazy that?" And they said, "What's going to happen?" And I always said it's going to have a very bad result, but I can't tell you when.
Is there anything you see happening right now that could have a bad result? And one thing that comes to mind is what's been happening with the very easy central bank policy with central banks around the globe.
Well, I think that the central banks were sort of forced into that. So what was wrong was not the central bank reaction, which I think was correct. They went to the whip. They don't have an unlimited number of weapons. And we'd be in way worse shape if both political parties hadn't backed huge central bank intervention. The big mistake was made by allowing the boom to go so crazy and so much evil and folly to run so rampant. Greenspan, to his credit, has since recognized that he was wrong. He's the only one who's done that. Everyone else has managed to look at this enormous denouement and leave the previous ideas intact.
When you look
That's
at
a common human way of handling things. No matter how bad the evidence, you just keep your previous conclusions.
When you look at, though, the easy Fed policy, you point out that it was necessary, and there's a lot of people who have said that. But David Einhorn wrote a piece yesterday in the Huffington Post where he said too much of a good thing is a bad thing. He compared it to jelly donuts and said one's good, two might be okay. By the time you get to 6 or a dozen, things get a lot more complicated. And I'm wondering, are we at that point with the easy policy?
Well, I don't think he's saying it quite right. It's roughly right, but not quite right. What happens is that an economy with a certain amount of basic virtue, like a bunch of Germans or Japanese or something, can resort to a lot of extreme Keynesian intervention and help things. But if your whole cultural system disintegrates, say the way it did in Greece, where everybody wants an easy living with no work and a lot of make-believe and fraud and what have you, then the Keynesian stuff won't work. Keynesian stuff, so what happens is that all this intervention works best if you have a lot of basic merit, basic credit in the bank, so to speak, which you've earned by deserving it. And of course, we've used up some of our store of basic credit. That's what's happened.
So where does that leave us?
So we're more dangerous than we used to be.
Is there a way to measure, if we're on a scale of 1 to 10 and 10's a real tipping point, where are we along that scale?
Well, that's a very intelligent question. And if the people who teach economics asked it and answered it more often, we'd have a better educated citizenry. It's so hard. It doesn't fit the techniques of economics to discuss the sin ratio. They're very uncomfortable talking about sin in economics.
And what does your gut tell you, though? As somebody
Well,
who's
we
been
have a
watching
lot
this
of
play out.
sin and more than we formerly had. The reason the Keynesian stuff worked so well when we finally came to it in preparation for World War II was because we had so much virtue to draw on. Mm-hmm. So the Keynesian stuff really worked perfectly. As your virtue deteriorates, as people seek easy money from the government by using their voting privileges instead of through working, then the Keynesian stuff will work less well the next time. And next time it will work less well. That's what's happening.
I take it you're not in Paul Krugman's camp, though. He thinks that all we need is that the Fed didn't do enough, that the government didn't do enough.
Paul Krugman does not sufficiently understand the kind of sin that the Democrats like. You know, the crooked plaintiffs' lawyers, and that stuff disintegrates the body politic and it affects how well that these economic principles that he believes in works. That said, I think Paul Krugman is one of the smartest and most articulate people we have, and he's very often right.
You touched on this idea, though, of people using their voting privileges rather than working. I guess.
Well, that's Greece. Everybody recognizes if you go too far along that line, you'll get a very dysfunctional civilization.
Are we near a point like that in the United States?
Well, we're nearer than we used to be. We still have a lot of virtue left.
Okay. If you look at what the Fed has done, other people point to it and say, it's doing this because we have no fiscal policy right now. The monetary policy is taking the part of where fiscal policy should be stepping in. Would you agree with that thesis?
Well, the Fed has a limited repertoire, and actually they have to choose from the repertoire they have. And the Fed can't vote a lot of money to create armaments or dams or highways or what have you. So what they do is they affect what they can affect. I've got no real quarrel with the Federal Reserve System. I think that on the way up, Greenspan was blind not to step on the boom.
But you don't
He really overdosed on Ayn Rand. And practically everybody else did too.
But there's not a screaming signal that's going out right now that is nearly as clear?
Well, I don't think it's as easy to fix as it would have been if we'd never gone so crazy. So it may well be that we have a long slog ahead of us.
As an investor, though, Einhorn used this whole thesis that he had, the idea that too much of a good thing is a bad thing, to say that in a normal situation like this, he would be buying stocks, selling bonds, and selling gold. But because he doesn't trust the Fed, he says he's buying gold right now. Is that a thesis that makes sense?
Well, not to me. I think gold is a great thing to sew into your garments if you're a Jewish family in Vienna in 1939, but I think civilized people don't buy gold. They invest in productive businesses.
All right, let's talk about some of the productive businesses you see right now as you look around the
Well,
world.
I love the portfolio we've gradually developed in Berkshire. And we just have a wonderful portfolio of businesses if you average them out. And by and large, they're doing productive, useful work. It's not outsmarting the computer systems in the trading markets.
Over the last 4 or 5 years, you've changed that portfolio pretty drastically with some of the major acquisitions that have come along. Burlington Northern, Lubrizol. Did you intentionally set out to change the portfolio?
We've always been opportunistic.
What does that mean?
Well, it's Carlyle. He said, the task of man is not to see what lies dimly in the distance, but do the duty that lies clearly at hand. And we are like Carlyle.
Do you see any great duties at hand right now?
No, but I think we've been pretty good at grasping things our duty impelled us to grasp, and it's worked way better than master planning. I have a deep distrust of master planning. People get to believing the plan because they created it.
So the chaos
and what's
theory?
needed is the kind of propensity to disbelieve that by changing your previous conclusions. And we're very good at that, thank God.
Mm-hmm. When you look at the investment portfolio and how it has changed, IBM is now the second largest holding for Berkshire. Warren told us yesterday that he didn't even tell you about that purchase until he was about halfway into it.
That's true.
What did you think when he did tell you about it?
I was perfectly okay with it. It's a very Buffett-style play.
How so?
Well, it's simple. They announced what they were going to do and why they thought it was going to work. You could see how entrenched IBM was in many places, including the Burlington Railroad. I think our business experience helps our investment judgment and vice versa. And so I have no problem with that. What's happened, of course, is the investment portfolio, when we used to have these meetings decades ago, there would be more in common stock value in the portfolios of Berkshire than there was in the market capitalization of the whole country, the whole company. And that went on year after year after year. That has radically changed. Now most of the value is in controlled businesses. And the investment portfolio is something that looks more like the normal portfolio of an insurance company.
Is that a good thing?
Sure, sure. We always said that what we liked best was owning a wonderful business outright. And second best, we liked good ideas and securities. Mm-hmm. That has never changed.
Do you tweet?
No.
I didn't think so.
I don't use a cell phone.
Okay, so tweeting would be a bit of a stretch, but...
A bit of a stretch, I'll say.
I did tweet that I was going to be talking to you today, though, and there were a few interesting questions that came in from people on Twitter who wanted to hear from you. One of the best ones was, what catalysts do you think will it take for CEOs to shift their focus from cost containment to growth?
Well, I think everybody always wants to do growth. And it's when that avenue looks difficult that people go to the cost containment. I have a friend with a moving business, and he used to have 330 employees. Now he's got about 240. And they used to be employees with perks, and now most of them are independent contractors. He did that because he had to in the Great Recession, which enormously affected the movie business. He didn't shift to cost containment as some kind of involved strategy. Life was forcing it on him. And a lot of that has happened in business. But it's not because they prefer it. Everyone would prefer to build new plants based on anticipated demand and do growth. And this other stuff is stuff they do as a second choice. Berkshire has always tried to keep a culture where we act like we were having a recession when we aren't. So the cost containment is
already there.
We're already there. And some of our businesses are pretty good at that. Others are less good.
It's interesting what you said about your friend's business. Was it in the moving business or
Yes.
the movie business? Okay, so he's in the moving business, and he has these 240 employees who are now contractors.
Not all of them, but the great majority. And fewer of them.
Will he bring them back on
No.
as business picks up?
No, it's never going back.
Why?
He squeezed the cost out. That's one of the main troubles with the economy is everybody has done what my friend in the moving business has done, who can. That's perfectly logical. That's the way capitalism works.
Some people say it's Washington's fault that employers aren't hiring right now. What do you make of that argument?
Well, I don't think too much of it. I think you can argue that there is some duty to be a little optimistic, meaning that the successful corporation to some extent should be a shock absorber in the civilization and take a little pain before it translates it into the workers' paychecks. Mm-hmm. And I think most businesses do operate that way. They do act as a shock absorber. But they also have to change their cost structure to adapt to the competitive reality. And people had no alternative. It's just amazing what happened in American manufacturing. I have a brother-in-law who made draftsman stools for years in a little factory right here in Omaha. And when the Chinese got good at making draftsman stools, it was impossible for that business to continue. I don't think that was evil or anything else. I think that kind of creative destruction happens in capitalism with free trade. And it's very painful for the people that get hit by it. But it's painful for Kodak when the technology changes. And I don't think you should look for a villain. What happened to Kodak is just a natural outcome of competitive capitalism. It's awful for Rochester and it's awful for a lot of people, but it's probably good for the greater system of the world.
It's tough for the shareholders who were in Eastman Kodak too.
Horrible.
How do you look out there?
By the way, I don't think there's too much excuse for that.
Why is that?
I don't think General Motors should have wiped out its shareholders. That was a huge failure of management. You stop to think about it. Berkshire is a collection of failed businesses that are gone. And here it is, this wonderful, thriving place. As our businesses failed, our shareholders' interests did not fail. We adapted.
You mean just Berkshire itself?
We wrung money out of the failing businesses and bought other businesses, and General Motors utterly flunked that test. They destroyed their shareholders.
Should the company still exist? Was the government right to bail them out?
That's a hard question.
Why? Because of the contagion?
I don't have a strong feeling either way on that one.
Do you have a
I'm glad I don't have to make those kinds of decisions.
Do you have a strong feeling when it comes down to the presidential election? Warren has been very outspoken about his support of President Obama. Where do you see this election heading? Well,
of course, I'm in the other party, but there's plenty to regret in the Republican Party. But there's plenty to regret in the Democratic Party. I am not enthusiastic about our politics now, where the nutcases in each party have come to power and hate each other. And I remember a more bipartisan world with affection.
What do you think about Mitt Romney?
Well, I think he's by far the best of the Republican nominees. So did Warren. Mm-hmm. I think, considering how poisonous the political atmosphere in the country is, it's amazing that we have two people as outstanding as those we have. I think that people will live to have two candidates out there and just hate having to make the choice. I think there's a lot of merit in both these people.
Do you think the business world, the investing world, changes based on who wins that election of the two?
Well, of course, everybody likes to think that there's a holy war that matters terribly. I don't think it matters that much.
Why not?
Well, I think it's the nature of democratic capitalism to have a social safety net. And it doesn't go away when the Republicans get in office, and the Democrats aren't allowed to go as crazy as they would like to when they get in office. And so the system has worked at least moderately well in preventing really extreme bad governmental conduct.
We do have some pretty huge issues facing us, not to mention the deficit itself. And
we always do. You know, think if we had the Cold War with all those intercontinental missiles aimed at one another, and there's always some big problem that we're coping with. And so I just think that comes with a human condition.
What do you think about the stock market overall? The Dow just hitting 4-year highs this week.
Well, of course, averaged out, we're pretty agnostic about the market at Berkshire. We try and swim better than the tide and take the vicissitudes of the tide as they come. And but I do not think that the civilization is going totally to hell or anything like that.
Retail investors have not come back into the market in great form since the 2008 downturn. They haven't been back as quickly as institutional investors and hardcore traders. Do you think that they are
Well,
doing
the whole
themselves...
market is more institutional than it used to be.
But are
So, of
retail
course,
investors doing themselves a disservice by not being involved?
Well, I think the ordinary investor who actively is trading with the help of the ordinary stockbroker is going to get a result which is way worse than the market provides.
You mean just indexes, investing
Yeah, I
in
just
index
think the
funds?
people who listen to CNN and want to be do-it-yourself investors, averaged out, they're going to be losers.
So what should they do? Just follow the indexes?
Well, if you don't know very much, you should buy an index. And knowing enough to make alternative conduct safe is something that's always going to be a minority sport.
What about the idea of staying out of stocks and looking for alternative investments because they got burned by the market overall?
Well, that's a natural thing to do. But what we've always tried to do is to be just the opposite. In other words, when everybody is totally discouraged and think the world is going to hell, that's when we like to be buying.
Does this still look like one of those opportunities, a buying opportunity?
Well, it doesn't look as much so as it did at the bottom tick.
Right. But do you get nervous with the Dow at a 4-year high?
I'm not nervous about the basic portfolio of Berkshire as part of our insurance operation. Mm-hmm. And I really like the portfolio of our controlled businesses. That has enormously improved.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything when you look around, investing here in the United States versus overseas? I know you've been very active looking at some of the investments in China and other places. What to you is the most exciting part of potential growth?
Well, of course, China has grown at a rate that for a country that big is unprecedented in the previous history of the world. So that's a huge development, and it's enormously important to the world. When that many people start getting ahead year after year at that kind of a percentage rate, it affects the whole world, and it's a huge development. I think we have no sensible alternative except to be very friendly with China, and I think they have no sensible alternative except to be very friendly with us.
We have people who come on our air, Jim Chanos and others, who worry about the slowdown in China and who say that it can't, obviously it can't continue at the same pace, but if it's a harsh
anything that's
landing.
extreme as that will eventually stop. China will not grow at real terms at 10% per annum for another 40 years or something.
But
they would own the world.
Can they ease into this landing, though, I guess is the question.
Well, nobody knows that for sure, do they?
No, what do you think, though?
I would bet that with fluctuations, China continues to do very well with its policies.
Is there...
I would argue that in some important respects, they've been smarter than we have.
Which respects?
Their set of policies created by, a nominally communist government have actually been very intelligent in driving the welfare of their people ahead at a rapid rate. It's a huge achievement what they've done.
There have been a lot of murmurs about the next step, since the party is changing hands later this year? You're going to see new leadership that comes in, continuing that openness. And I guess you think that's the right way to go too?
Well, I don't have any better skill at predicting the future governance of China than other people, and I'm not sure even in China they know any better than we do. But I would say, considering where they started, in a communist bureaucracy with widespread starvation, and without any big wars or anything, to have transformed a nation that big by a combination of population control and bringing in free market business principles, it's one of the most remarkable human achievements in the history of the world. And I can't help admiring some of the people who caused it. And when I meet these modern communist leaders, they look like so many admirals of the Navy. They don't look like crazy ideologues of the past. So what's going on is very peculiar, but they have some of the merit of Singapore in modern China. They copied it on purpose. And I regard what happened in Singapore as the best example of successful governance in the history of the world. To take a handful of people in a malarial swamp and turn them into a meritocratic civilization that works as well as Singapore does is a huge stunt. And I think China, to some extent, has copied Singapore. And that, I think they deserve some admiration.
When you look at this weekend, what's your favorite part of the Berkshire annual meeting?
Well,
the entire weekend.
I like practically everything about it. I like coming back to the city where I was raised. I like going by the high school where I went for 4 years. I like seeing the friends of my youth who are still alive, which is a diminishing group, rapidly diminishing group. I like all the Berkshire people. I like the people at headquarters. I like the culture. I love the controlling executives at the subsidiaries. So, and I like the shareholders. And I like the whole culture of having this celebratory festival with a deep intellectual content. These people would not come to the shareholder meeting in this quantity merely because they made a lot of money or because Berkshire has made a lot of money or that they have a good time shopping. All those things help, but to some extent you're talking about a cultural phenomenon and a wisdom-seeking phenomenon. And why wouldn't I like that?
Can't think of a single reason.
No, and who else is doing it?
Can't think of another place.
Yeah, well, I mean, who else? When they ask Warren how he wants to be remembered, he wants to be remembered as a teacher. Well, who in the hell is saying that from the top of a company, from a record like Warren's? Why wouldn't I like being associated with that ethos?
How do you want to be remembered?
Well, I have a little different twist. I have less ambition than Warren at being a great teacher. I am trying to emulate my great-grandfather. When he died, they said about him, nobody envied the success so fairly won and wisely used. It's a simple philosophy. But wouldn't Wall Street have worked better if more people had tried to imitate my great-grandfather Ingham? By the way, I've lost touch with all the Inghams. Here I've had this enormous influence from long dead people, and I don't know any of the current Inghams. They're my second and third cousins.
What do you think about the state of Wall Street right now?
Well, I think it's better, but I would say the majority of what was wrong has not been fixed.
We had Michael Lewis on the show this week, and he said that the Volcker rule is not enough. It needs to have way more teeth. There need to be even stricter things, and that sounds a lot like what you've said in the past.
I totally agree with Michael Lewis on that. If I were making the rule, I would make Michael Lewis look like a piker.
I thought you might say something like that.
Yeah.
How would you lay it if you were a benevolent dictator and this was yours to lay out?
Well, take the rapid training by the computer geniuses with the computer algorithms. Those people have all the social utility of a bunch of rats admitted to a granary. I never would have allowed the rats to get in the granary. I don't want the brilliant young men of America devoting their lives to being rats in somebody else's granary. That's not my idea of the right way to run the republic, and if you let me write the laws, it wouldn't happen. But of course, nobody's going to do that.
But what laws could be written to keep that from happening? How do you stop it?
I wouldn't allow. I wouldn't allow the system to be that way at all. I just wouldn't allow anybody to make money out of short-term trading. I might have Tobin taxes. I would do something. I think if we changed the incentives, a lot of this regrettable behavior would go away.
What kind of incentives? Clawbacks?
Well, take Tobin taxes.
Okay.
I've always felt it did more harm than good to have this enormous liquidity in stock markets and other security markets, because it makes those markets a perfect casino for gamblers. And if you had the right tax incentives, the gamblers couldn't win on the short-term trading. I don't think we need all this liquidity with all this gambling frenzy. But there again, I'm in a distinct minority.
All right, let's pretend like I know what Tobin taxes are. Enlighten me.
Tobin was an economist at Yale, and he wanted taxes. For instance, suppose I had a rule that the tax on a short-term gain was, let's say it's 99%. There wouldn't be a lot of people trading derivatives.
That sounds like a very blunt tool for changing behavior.
Yes, but you wouldn't have to make it quite that blunt. If you'd let me do it, believe me, I would have a different world. I would have less gambling and more legitimate investment and more long-term thinking and less of this short-term trading frenzy. I would not allow people to run hedge funds and report their pay as long-term capital gains. Mm-hmm. I think we do a lot of things that are literally sort of insane. And once you allow this wrong culture to get in and be entrenched and be remunerative, you create political power that protects the activities that are regrettable. What good is it doing the civilization to have a group of people clipping money through computer algorithms that work a lot like legalized front-running of orders? What good is that doing anybody? Except the people making the money.
But those are changes that have been discussed in Washington, some of these very quick changes to the tax code.
It's not, I would say, I think you could get the hedge fund compensation treated as ordinary income. Mm-hmm. I think that probably will pass one of these days. But how could anybody rational in either party have allowed the current situation to go on as long as it has? Well, the answer is they're both getting a lot of donations from these people. And once they cured it, they wouldn't be getting all the donations from the people who don't want the situation changed.
In spite of all of this, though, when you look both at the political and the economic future of the country, you have a very bright outlook?
Well, I think there's more sin than there used to be. But if you went back far enough, you would find a lot of sin. My favorite saying was about Jay Gould and Russell Sage. And you remember that era, and they said of those two in Congress, when they're talking, they're lying, and when they're quiet, they're stealing. And we've come a long way from that. And those people were reputable in some places, and that was their basic morality. They said of Cullis P. Huntington, Ambrose Bierce said, he was scrupulously dishonest, and he had no more soul than a shark. And I think that was pretty correct. And now they did build a transcontinental railroad with the help of a lot of Chinese. And they got the job done. But I think we're a long way from that. It was massive bribery that caused that railroad to exist. And I think we're a long way past. We tend to idealize the past, but a lot of what was very regrettable is now gone.
We'll leave it on that high note then. Charlie, I want to thank you very much for your time today.
Glad to do it.